Welcome to the Dirty Secrets channel. Are you ready for another incredible story? Enjoy the video.
You know that feeling when you walk into your home and something is just wrong? Not like a broken window or a mess, but wrong in a way that makes your skin crawl. The air feels different. The silence sounds different. You stand there in your own living room, keys still in your hand, and your brain is trying to catch up with what your gut already knows. Something terrible has happened here. And the worst part? The people responsible are probably the last people you'd ever suspect. You tell yourself you're overreacting. You tell yourself there's a logical explanation. You walk through each room, checking, hoping you're wrong, praying you're just being paranoid. But that sick feeling in your stomach keeps getting stronger with every step. That voice in your head keeps whispering that the people you trusted most, the people who are supposed to protect your family, might have just violated your home in the worst possible way. You're not crazy. You're not imagining things. That instinct screaming at you right now, it's trying to tell you something you desperately don't want to believe. The woman in this story felt exactly what you're feeling. She came home to find something precious missing, and when she finally discovered who took it and why, it shattered everything she thought she knew about family. This is Rebecca's story, and it started on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. The front door was unlocked. That was the first thing I noticed when I got home from picking up my son Ethan from his piano lesson. Not wide open, just unlocked. Which wouldn't have been strange except that my husband David was supposed to be at work until 6, and I'm obsessive about locking doors. I'm 31 years old and I work as a financial analyst for a mid-sized consulting firm, which means I spend my days looking for inconsistencies in numbers, finding the things that don't add up. That attention to detail isn't something I can turn off when I clock out. So, an unlocked door when it should be locked? That registered immediately as wrong. I pushed the door open slowly, listening for sounds of an intruder, my heart already starting to race. The house was silent. Too silent. Ethan was chattering beside me about the new piece his teacher had assigned him, some Chopin nocturne that he was excited about, but his voice seemed to be coming from very far away. I stepped inside, still holding his small hand, and that's when I saw it, or rather, didn't see it. The piano was gone, not moved, not pushed against a different wall. Gone. Completely gone. There was just empty space where it had been, a rectangular outline on the hardwood floor, slightly lighter than the surrounding wood because that spot had been protected from foot traffic and sunlight for the past 3 years. I stood there staring at that empty space, and I felt my brain just stall out. Pianos don't disappear. They're massive, heavy, complicated to move. You can't just casually steal a piano on a whim. This required planning, equipment, multiple people. Ethan noticed about 2 seconds after I did. He let go of my hand and ran to the spot where his piano had been, his little 7-year-old face crumpling in confusion. "Mom, where's my piano? Where did it go?" His voice was so small, so bewildered, and I didn't have an answer for him. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called David. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the noise of his office in the background, normal sounds of a normal workday. "Did you move the piano?" I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear him say it. "What?" "No." "Why would I move the piano? What are you talking about?" "It's gone," I said, and my voice cracked on the word. "I came home and the door was unlocked and the piano is just gone." The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and police reports and trying to explain to a confused and increasingly upset 7-year-old why someone would take his piano. The police officer who came to take our report was sympathetic but not particularly optimistic. "Piano thefts do happen," he explained, "because they're valuable and there's a market for them, but they're also really hard to fence because they're so distinctive and traceable." He took down the serial number, the make and model, a detailed description. It was a Steinway Model M, a gorgeous baby grand that had cost us $43,000 2 years ago. We'd saved for it, planned for it, because Ethan had shown such extraordinary talent from the moment he first touched a keyboard at age 4. His piano teacher, Mrs. Chen, had told us that Ethan had the kind of ear and natural feel for music that she only encountered once or twice in a career. She'd encouraged us to invest in a quality instrument, said it would make a real difference in his development as a musician. So we'd done it. We'd stretched our budget, made sacrifices, because we believed in our son's gift. And now it was just gone. Stolen. The officer said he'd file the report and check with local pawn shops and music stores, but he also gently suggested we contact our insurance company. I called them as soon as the police left. Our policy covered theft, but there was a $15,000 deductible, and the claims process could take months. The adjuster would need to come out, inspect the scene, verify the serial number against our proof of purchase. I had all the documentation, of course. I keep meticulous records of every major purchase we make. But even with insurance, we were looking at being out of pocket for a substantial amount, and Ethan was looking at months without a piano, months of missed practice, stalled progress, a gift going dormant at a critical developmental stage. I sat at the kitchen table that night after Ethan had finally cried himself to sleep and tried to make sense of it. The door had been unlocked but not broken. Nothing else in the house had been touched. No drawers rifled through, no jewelry missing, no electronics taken. Just the piano. Which meant whoever did this had a key, knew we wouldn't be home, and had come specifically for that piano. They'd probably needed at least 3 or 4 people to move it, plus a truck with a lift gate, professional moving equipment. This wasn't some random crime of opportunity. This was planned. David sat across from me, his face pale and drawn. "Who has a key to our house?" he asked. I mentally ran through the list. My parents, but they lived in Florida and hadn't visited in over a year. David's parents, who lived 20 minutes away and watched Ethan occasionally. My sister, who also lived out of state. The cleaning service had a key, but they came on Tuesdays and were bonded and insured and had been with us for 3 years without incident. And that was it. That was the complete list. I looked at David, and I could see the same terrible thought forming in his mind that was forming in mine, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud. It couldn't be. It didn't make sense. There was no reason. No possible reason. But the evidence was right there in front of us, cold and undeniable. The only people who had access to our home, who knew our schedules, who knew about the piano and its value, were family. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up our home security camera footage. We had a doorbell camera that recorded motion, but it had a limited field of view and only captured the front porch, not the driveway or street. I scrolled back through the day's recordings. There, at 11:17 in the morning, the camera had captured someone approaching our front door. The angle was wrong to see their face clearly, but I could see a hand reaching toward the doorbell, then apparently changing their mind and using a key instead. The timestamp showed the door opening at 11:18, then nothing else until I came home at 4:30. I played it again, and again. That hand, that jacket, something about the build of the person. David leaned over my shoulder, squinting at the screen. "Can you zoom in?" I tried, but the resolution wasn't good enough. The image just pixelated into uselessness. But there was something. Some detail nagging at the edge of my awareness. I took a screenshot and sent it to my phone, then opened our neighborhood's Facebook group and posted about the theft, asking if anyone had seen a moving truck on our street that day. Within 20 minutes, I had 3 responses. Yes, someone had seen a truck. White, no company markings, with 4 or 5 men loading something large and covered with blankets. Around noon. One neighbor had thought it was strange that she hadn't seen any for sale signs at our house, but figured maybe we were just moving some furniture to storage. Another had taken note of the truck because it had partially blocked the street. Nobody had gotten a license plate number, but one person thought they'd seen the truck turn toward the highway heading north. Toward where David's parents lived. I felt something cold settle in my chest. No, it couldn't be. Melanie and Robert would never. They loved Ethan. They loved us. There was no reason they would do something like this. But that jacket in the security footage. I pulled the image back up on my phone, zooming in as much as I could on that sleeve. Navy blue with some kind of patch or emblem on the shoulder. I'd seen that jacket before. Recently. I opened my photos and scrolled back through the last few weeks. There. From Ethan's birthday party 3 weeks ago. Robert wearing a navy blue jacket with an emblem from his golf club, the same shade, the same style. I showed David. He stared at it for a long moment, his jaw working. "That doesn't prove anything," he said finally. "Lots of people have jackets like that." But his voice was uncertain. "Call them," I said. "Just call and ask if they've seen anything suspicious in the neighborhood. Feel them out." He pulled out his phone, but his hand was shaking. He dialed and put it on speaker. It rang 4 times before Melanie answered, her voice bright and cheerful. "David, honey, what a nice surprise. We were just talking about you and Rebecca. How are you both doing?" "Fine, Mom," David said, and I could hear the strain in his voice. "We actually had something weird happen today. Someone broke into the house and stole Ethan's piano." There was a pause, just a beat too long before Melanie responded. "Oh my goodness, that's terrible. Is everyone okay? Were you home when it happened?" "No, it happened during the day while we were out. The thing is, nothing else was taken, just the piano, and the door was unlocked but not broken, so whoever did it had a key." Another pause. "Well, that's very strange. Have you called the police?" "Yes, and insurance. I was calling to ask if you or Dad have noticed any suspicious vehicles or people in your area lately. Sometimes these theft rings work a whole neighborhood." "We haven't seen anything unusual," Melanie said, but her voice sounded different now. Tighter. "I'll certainly keep an eye out, though. You should really get your locks changed if someone has a key." "Good idea," David said. "We'll do that. Listen, I should go. We're dealing with insurance stuff and trying to keep Ethan calm. He's pretty upset." Of course. Give him our love." "And David? Yes? Maybe this is a blessing in disguise. That piano was too much for a child anyway. You could get him something more appropriate, more his size." David's face went white. He looked at me, and I looked back at him, and in that moment we both knew. We knew with absolute certainty. "What do you mean, too much for a child?" David asked slowly. "Well," Melanie said, and now there was something defensive in her tone. "We've talked about this before. That piano costs more than most people's cars. It's excessive for a 7-year-old. Children don't appreciate things like that. They should learn on a regular piano first, earn something nice later." "We never talked about that," David said. "You mentioned it once, and I told you that Ethan's teacher recommended a quality instrument, and we'd made our decision as his parents." Melanie made a dismissive sound. "You and Rebecca spoil that boy. You're going to ruin him, giving him everything he wants, making him think he's special." "He is special," David said, and his voice was hard now. "He has a gift. And that piano wasn't about spoiling him. It was about supporting his development. It was our decision and our money." "Was," Melanie said. Past tense. Interesting word choice. There was dead silence. David's hand was gripping the phone so hard his knuckles were white. "Mom," he said very quietly, "where is Ethan's piano?" "I don't know what you're implying," Melanie said, "but I don't appreciate your tone. You call me with this story about a theft and then immediately start accusing me? That's hurtful, David. That's really hurtful." "I didn't accuse you of anything," David said. "I asked you a simple question. Where is the piano?" "I think you should go," Melanie said coldly. "When you're ready to apologize for this conversation, you know where to find me." She hung up. David sat there staring at his phone. "She did it," he whispered. "She actually did it. My own mother stole from us, stole from her own grandson, I felt numb. "We need proof," I said. "We can't just accuse her based on a hunch and a suspicious phone call. The security footage isn't clear enough. We need actual evidence." "How?" David asked helplessly. "It's not like we can just search their house." "Actually," I said slowly, an idea forming, "we kind of can. You still have a key to their place, right? From when you were checking on it while they were on that cruise last year?" He nodded. "So we wait a few days, let things calm down, and then we pay them a visit. Unannounced. Just to talk, to smooth things over. And while we're there, we look around. I'm a financial analyst, David. I know how to find things people are trying to hide." He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "You're talking about investigating my parents, like they're criminals. If they stole a $43,000 piano from their own grandson," I said, "then yes, they are criminals, and they need to face consequences." The next 3 days were some of the hardest of my life. I had to act normal, go to work, help Ethan with his homework, pretend like everything was fine while my brain was spinning through scenarios and possibilities. I started doing research. How do you sell a stolen piano? Where would you take it? I learned that high-end pianos like Steinways have serial numbers registered with the manufacturer. Any reputable dealer would check those numbers before buying a used piano. But there were less reputable options: estate sales, private sales, auctions, overseas buyers who wouldn't check or wouldn't care. I called Mrs. Chen, Ethan's piano teacher, and asked her hypothetically if she knew anyone who might be interested in buying a Steinway under the table. She was quiet for a moment, then said she'd heard rumors about a dealer in Pennsylvania who bought and sold instruments with questionable provenance, but she'd never worked with him personally and wouldn't recommend it. Pennsylvania. I looked it up. 3 hours north, exactly the direction that moving truck had been heading. I spent an evening searching online for piano dealers in Pennsylvania, scrolling through websites, looking for something that felt off. Most of them were legitimate businesses with showrooms and customer reviews and proper business licenses. But then I found one: Prestige Piano Gallery. The website was professional-looking but sparse on details. No physical address listed, just a contact form and a phone number with a Pennsylvania area code. The inventory page showed several high-end pianos, including 2 Steinways, but the photos were generic stock images, not pictures of actual instruments in a showroom. I filled out the contact form pretending to be interested in purchasing a Steinway Model M and asking about current availability. I got a response within an hour. "We have a Model M that just came in. Excellent condition, barely used. Can offer you a significant discount from retail because it's a private sale. Interested parties can schedule a viewing by appointment only." I showed David. "This is them," I said. "This is where they took it." "We can't know that for sure," he said, but he was looking at the email with an expression of sick recognition. "There's one way to find out," I said. "We go see them. We tell them we want to go to your parents' house this weekend to apologize and smooth things over. And while we're there, we look for evidence. Receipts, emails, anything that connects them to this prestige piano place or shows a sudden influx of cash. And if we find something, then we take it to the police and let them handle it." David was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "Okay, let's do it." Before we continue, I want to take a moment to say something. If this story is resonating with you, if you're seeing pieces of your own life in what I'm sharing, you're not alone. This channel exists because too many people suffer in silence, thinking their pain doesn't matter or that no one would understand. But I understand, and thousands of people in this community understand. If you want to be part of a space where these stories are told, where the truth comes out, and where people like us finally get to see justice served, even if it's just in a story, then please subscribe. I share these stories every week, and I read every single comment. You matter here. Your story matters here. Now, let's get back to what happened next. Saturday morning, We drove to Melanie and Robert's house with Ethan in the back seat, blissfully unaware of the real purpose of our visit. David had called ahead, said we wanted to apologize for the tense phone call and spend some time together as a family. Melanie had been cool but accepting. "Fine," she'd said. "Come around 11. We'll have lunch." The drive took 22 minutes. I used the time to rehearse what I was looking for. Bank statements, deposit slips, emails or correspondence, anything with the name Prestige Piano Gallery, anything showing a large cash transaction in the last week. Robert and Melanie's home was a large colonial in a nice subdivision, all perfectly manicured lawns and expensive cars in driveways. They'd bought it 15 years ago when Robert retired from his position as a regional manager for a pharmaceutical company. They had money, or at least they seemed to. Nice cars, nice clothes, frequent vacations. But I'd learned over the years that appearance and reality don't always match, especially when it comes to finances. People can look wealthy while drowning in debt, and people who are drowning will do desperate things. Melanie opened the door before we could knock, smiling too brightly. "David, Rebecca, and my sweet Ethan. Come in, come in." She leaned down to hug Ethan, and I watched him hug her back without hesitation, without any idea that his beloved grandmother might have stolen his most precious possession. It made my chest ache. Robert appeared from the living room, a glass of scotch already in his hand, even though it was barely 11 in the morning. He clapped David on the shoulder and nodded at me. "Good to see you both." "Ethan, my boy, how about we go out back and I'll show you the new koi I added to the pond?" Ethan's face lit up, and he ran off with his grandfather, which was exactly what I'd been hoping for. With Ethan occupied, I could focus. Melanie led us into the kitchen where she had sandwich fixings laid out. "Rebecca, would you help me prepare lunch while David sets the table?" "Of course," I said, moving to the counter. I started slicing tomatoes while Melanie pulled out plates and talked about nothing, idle chatter about the weather and the neighbors and some show she'd been watching. I let her talk, making appropriate responses while my eyes scanned the kitchen. Mail stacked on the counter, a calendar on the wall, a laptop sitting closed on the breakfast nook table. After a few minutes, I excused myself to use the bathroom. Melanie directed me down the hall, second door on the right. Instead, I went to the first door, Robert's study. I slipped inside and gently closed the door behind me. The room smelled like cigar smoke and old leather. There was a large desk with a computer, filing cabinets, bookshelves. I started with the desk, quietly opening drawers and rifling through papers. Bills, letters, a folder with tax documents, nothing jumping out. I checked the computer, but it was password protected. Moved to the filing cabinet. It was unlocked, which surprised me until I remembered that Robert had always been careless about security, thought that because he lived in a nice neighborhood with a security system, he didn't need to lock things inside his own house. I flipped through folders, home insurance, car insurance, medical records, investment statements, and then I found it. A folder labeled miscellaneous receipts. Inside was a deposit slip from their bank dated 4 days ago. $100,000 cash deposit. My hands started shaking. $100,000, 4 days after Ethan's piano disappeared. That couldn't be a coincidence, but I needed more. I pulled out my phone and took photos of the deposit slip from multiple angles, making sure the date and amount were clearly visible. Then I kept searching. Underneath the bank deposit, there was a contract, a bill of sale. My vision actually tunneled for a second as I read it. Prestige Piano Gallery had purchased one Steinway Model M piano for the sum of $100,000 from Robert and Melanie Williams. The serial number was listed. I pulled out my phone and checked it against the serial number in our insurance documents. Perfect match. They'd sold our piano, Ethan's piano. They'd stolen it from us and sold it for $100,000. I took pictures of every page of that contract, my hands steady now despite the rage building in my chest. Then I looked closer at the contract terms. Prestige Piano Gallery had paid them $80,000 upfront and $20,000 upon delivery and verification of authenticity. The dates lined up perfectly. Delivery had been confirmed on Wednesday, the day of the theft. Final payment processed on Thursday, deposited on Friday. I found more. Emails printed out and filed away because apparently Robert still believed in keeping hard copies of important correspondence. The emails showed negotiations going back almost 2 months. Robert had initiated contact with Prestige Piano Gallery in early September, claiming to have a Steinway Model M in excellent condition that he was interested in selling. The dealer had asked for proof of ownership. Robert had replied that the piano was a family instrument and he could provide documentation. Except he couldn't, because he didn't own it. We did. But he'd apparently figured out a workaround, because the next email showed him saying he'd need a few weeks to retrieve the piano from storage. Storage. That's what he'd called our home. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly closed the filing cabinet, slipped the folder back exactly where I'd found it. The footsteps passed by. I waited a moment, then carefully opened the study door and peeked out. Clear. I walked quickly back to the bathroom, flushed the toilet for effect, washed my hands, and returned to the kitchen. Melanie looked up as I entered. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said with a smile, just needed a moment. We finished making sandwiches and carried them out to the back patio where Robert and David were sitting with Ethan between them. Ethan was talking excitedly about the koi, describing their colors and patterns. He looked so happy, so trusting. I sat down and picked up my sandwich, but I couldn't eat. I just kept thinking about those documents in Robert's study, the evidence of their betrayal. David caught my eye, and I gave him a tiny nod. He understood. I had found something. Lunch dragged on forever. Melanie kept up a stream of cheerful conversation, asking Ethan about school and asking David about work. Robert was quieter, drinking steadily, his face getting redder as the afternoon wore on. I watched them both and tried to understand how they could sit there acting so normal, so loving, when they'd done something so cruel. When they'd stolen from their own grandson and were now lying to our faces about it. Finally, David stood up and said we should get going. Ethan had homework, and we had errands to run. We said our goodbyes. Melanie hugged Ethan tightly and told him to come visit again soon. Robert tousled his hair and slipped him a $20 bill. And then we were in the car driving away, and I felt like I could finally breathe. David waited until we were on the highway before asking, "Well?" "I found it," I said quietly, glancing back to make sure Ethan had his headphones on and was absorbed in his tablet. Bank deposit slip for $100,000 dated 4 days ago. Bill of sale from Prestige Piano Gallery for a Steinway Model M with the exact serial number as ours. Emails going back 2 months showing Robert negotiating the sale. Everything we need. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. 100,000? They sold it for 100,000? Our piano was worth more than that. "I know," I said. "Steinway Model M's in good condition sell for anywhere from 40 to 60,000 used, more if they're recent and well-maintained. Ours was only 2 years old and in perfect condition. They could have gotten more from a legitimate dealer. But legitimate dealers would have checked the serial number and provenance. This Prestige piano place is basically a fence operation for stolen and questionable instruments. They paid 100,000, knowing they could turn around and sell it for 150 or more to someone who doesn't ask questions. Robert and Melanie knew they couldn't go through normal channels, so they took what they could get. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Why? Why would they do this? They don't need money. Dad has his pension and their investments. They just took a cruise to Alaska. They bought a new car last year. I've been thinking about that," I said, "and I think you're right that they don't need money for regular expenses. But I remember your mom saying something a few months ago about wanting to renovate their kitchen. And didn't your dad mention something about maybe buying a vacation condo in Florida? Maybe they have more debt than we realize. Maybe they've been living beyond their means and needed a quick influx of cash. And there was Ethan's piano, just sitting in our house, worth tens of thousands of dollars, and they had a key." David shook his head slowly. That's not a reason. That's not a justification. Even if they were drowning in debt, you don't steal from your own family. You ask for help. You figure something else out. You don't traumatize your 7-year-old grandson by stealing the thing he loves most in the world. We drove the rest of the way home in silence. Once we got Ethan settled with a snack and his homework, David and I went into our bedroom and I showed him all the photos I'd taken. He stared at them for a long time, his face pale. "We need to call the police," he said finally. "We have evidence of theft. They need to be arrested." "I know," I said, "but I want to do this right. I want to make sure they can't wriggle out of this. I'm going to send these photos to my email and back them up in 3 different places. Then tomorrow, I'm going to contact the detective who took our initial report and arrange to meet with him. We'll give him everything we have. Let him build the case." David nodded. "And then what happens?" "Then they get arrested," I said. "They'll be charged with grand theft. Given the value of what they stole, it's a serious felony. They could face years in prison. And we'll file a civil suit to recover the piano and damages. We'll make sure everyone knows what they did. His parents, our friends, their friends, everyone in their nice neighborhood with their nice houses. Everyone will know that Melanie and Robert Williams are thieves who stole from their own grandson." David sat down heavily on the bed. "My parents are going to go to prison." "Yeah," I said gently. "They are, and I'm sorry, but they chose this. They made this choice. We didn't." That night I lay awake thinking about everything that had led to this point. I'd always known Melanie was difficult. From the moment David and I started dating, she'd made little comments, suggestions that I wasn't quite good enough for her son, that my family background was too ordinary, that my career was cute but not particularly impressive. I'd ignored it because I loved David, and he stood up for me, and eventually Melanie had seemed to accept our relationship, or at least stopped openly criticizing it. When we'd gotten married, she'd thrown us a beautiful engagement party and cried during our wedding. When Ethan was born, she'd been thrilled. The perfect grandmother, or so it seemed. But there had always been this undercurrent of competition, this need to be in control. She had opinions about how we should raise Ethan, what we should feed him, how we should discipline him, what activities he should be involved in. And when Ethan started showing musical talent, she'd had opinions about that too. He should play sports, she'd said. Boys should be athletic. Piano is fine as a hobby, but it shouldn't be his whole life. You're making him soft. We'd disagreed. We'd supported Ethan in following his passion. And when we'd bought him that Steinway, Melanie had been furious. I remember the phone call. David had told his parents about the purchase, excited to share the news, and Melanie had let him have it. "That's an obscene amount of money to spend on a child," she'd said. "What are you thinking? You're going to make him entitled. He'll grow up thinking money grows on trees." David had calmly explained our reasoning, and eventually Melanie had backed down. But she'd never really let it go. She'd made little comments every time she visited. "Must be nice to have so much money to throw around. When I was raising you, we had to budget for everything. Your father and I worked hard for what we have, and we didn't spoil you with expensive toys. And now this." Now I understood. This wasn't just about money. This was about control, about putting us in our place, about showing us that we couldn't make decisions she didn't approve of. She'd stolen Ethan's piano not because she desperately needed $100,000, but because she was angry that we'd bought it in the first place. This was punishment. This was her way of saying we'd made the wrong choice and she was correcting it. The realization made me feel sick. What kind of person punishes a child to make a point to his parents? What kind of grandmother traumatizes her own grandson because she disagrees with a parenting decision? Monday morning, I called the detective handling our case. His name was Detective Morrison, and he'd been professional but not particularly engaged during our initial report. I could tell he'd seen it as just another property crime, unlikely to be solved. But when I told him I had evidence identifying the thieves, his tone changed immediately. He agreed to meet with me that afternoon. I took a long lunch break and drove to the police station. Detective Morrison led me to a small interview room, and I laid out everything I had. The security camera footage showing someone with a key entering our house. The neighbor reports of the moving truck, the bill of sale and deposit slip I'd photographed. The emails showing premeditation and planning going back months. He listened carefully, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. "And these suspects are your husband's parents?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Melanie and Robert Williams. They had a key to our house because they sometimes watched our son. They knew our schedules, they knew the value of the piano, and they had motive." "What motive?" I explained about Melanie's disapproval of the purchase, her ongoing issues with how we parented Ethan, her need for control. The detective nodded slowly. "Okay, this is good. This is really solid evidence. I'm going to need the original security footage, and I'll need you to provide official statements. We'll also need to verify that these documents you photographed are authentic, which means we'll need to obtain a search warrant for their home. Once we have that, we can compare what you photographed with the originals. If it all matches, we'll have probable cause for arrest." "How long will that take?" I asked. "Search warrant could take a few days to a week depending on the judge's schedule. But I'll prioritize it given the strength of the evidence. In the meantime, I need you and your husband to not have any contact with the suspects. Don't call them, don't visit, don't tip them off that we're investigating." "Understood. And the piano? If we can locate it and verify it's yours via the serial number, we can seize it as evidence and eventually return it to you. But if they've already sold it to a third party, recovery gets more complicated. You might need to pursue civil litigation." "I'll do whatever it takes," I said. The next week was torture. Every day I waited for news, and every day there was nothing. David was struggling. He barely slept, barely ate. The knowledge that his own parents had betrayed us was eating him alive. He kept saying he should have seen it coming, should have protected us better. I tried to reassure him that this wasn't his fault, but I could tell he didn't believe me. Ethan kept asking about his piano. When were we getting a new one? Could he visit the music store to pick one out? I put him off with vague promises, not wanting to give him hope, until I knew for sure we could recover his original piano or get enough from insurance and restitution to buy a replacement. Mrs. Chen was understanding but concerned. Ethan was missing critical practice time. His progress was stalling. Finally, 8 days after my meeting with Detective Morrison, he called. "We executed the search warrant this morning. Everything you photographed was exactly where you said it would be. We've verified the serial number on the bill of sale matches your piano, and we've located the piano itself at a private warehouse in Pennsylvania. The dealer who bought it from your in-laws has been very cooperative once we explained he was in possession of stolen property. He's agreed to turn it over and is claiming he had no knowledge it was stolen. We'll see if that holds up." "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now we arrest Robert and Melanie Williams. I'm heading to their home this afternoon with 2 other officers. They'll be charged with felony grand theft, conspiracy to commit theft, and possession of stolen property proceeds. Given the value involved and the premeditation, the DA is taking this very seriously. They're looking at significant prison time if convicted." "I need to tell my husband," I said. "Of course." "And Mrs. Hayes?" "Yes? I just want to say what they did to you and your family was unconscionable. Stealing from your own grandson. I've been doing this job for 16 years, and it still surprises me what people are capable of." "Thank you," I said quietly. I hung up and immediately called David. He was at work, but I told him anyway. They're arresting them today. Right now. There was a long silence. Then I heard him crying. Quiet, muffled sobs. I gave him time. Eventually, he said, "I need to go home. I can't be here." "I'll meet you there," I said. We didn't tell Ethan yet. We agreed to wait until we knew the outcome of the arrest and had more information. We sat on the couch holding hands, not talking, just waiting. My phone rang at 4:30. It was Detective Morrison. They're in custody, both of them. Robert tried to deny everything at first, but when faced with the evidence, he crumbled. Melanie never said a word, just asked for a lawyer. They've been booked and will have their arraignment tomorrow. The DA is not offering bail given the flight risk and the amount of money involved. What about the piano? We're arranging transport. You should have it back by the end of the week. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. That evening, David's phone started ringing. First his aunt, Robert's sister, then his cousin, then friends of his parents. The news was spreading. Robert and Melanie had been arrested. Taken out of their home in handcuffs, the neighbors had seen. Everyone wanted to know what happened. David turned off his phone. We sat Ethan down and told him a simplified version of the truth. Grandma and Grandpa had made a very bad choice. They had taken his piano without permission and sold it. But the police had found it and it was coming back. And Grandma and Grandpa were going to have to face consequences for what they'd done. Ethan processed this with the logic of a 7-year-old. Are they going to jail? He asked. Yes, probably, David said. I'm sorry, buddy. I know you love them. But what they did was wrong, and grown-ups have to take responsibility when they do wrong things just like kids do. Ethan thought about this. Then he said, I'm sad they took my piano. But I'm happy it's coming back. Can I practice when it gets home? Of course you can, I said, hugging him. You can practice all you want. The piano arrived 6 days later, delivered by a police transport and 2 officers who helped our hired movers get it back into position in our living room. I inspected every inch of it, not a scratch, not a single mark. They'd taken good care of it during transport and storage, at least. Ethan sat down and played, and the sound filled our house again, and I felt something in my chest finally unclench. The criminal case moved forward. Robert and Melanie were arraigned, and both pled not guilty, which didn't surprise me. Their lawyer was expensive and aggressive. He argued that this was a family dispute, a misunderstanding, that Robert and Melanie had believed they had permission to sell the piano. The DA tore that argument apart. How could they have permission when Rebecca and David had immediately reported it as stolen? How could they have permission when they'd used deception to access the house? How could they have permission when the bill of sale showed negotiations starting 2 months before the theft? The evidence was overwhelming. Phone records showed Melanie had called Robert 17 times the day before the theft. Text messages showed them coordinating timing. Security footage showed Robert was the one who'd entered our house with the key. Bank records showed the deposit of $100,000. The dealer from Prestige Piano Gallery testified that Robert had claimed to own the piano outright, had provided fake documentation of ownership. There was no misunderstanding here. This was premeditated theft. 3 months later, faced with the mountain of evidence, Robert and Melanie changed their pleas to guilty. In exchange for the plea, the DA agreed to recommend concurrent sentences rather than consecutive. Robert was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. Melanie got 3 years. They were also ordered to pay full restitution of $100,000 plus damages, legal fees, and the cost of Ethan's missed lessons and emotional distress. The total came to $137,000. Their lawyer argued they didn't have that kind of money. The judge didn't care. Sell your house, he said. Liquidate your retirement accounts. You stole from your own grandson to fund your lifestyle. Now your lifestyle is going to pay for what you did. I sat in that courtroom and watched them be led away in handcuffs, and I didn't feel triumph. I felt sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that they'd valued money and control more than their relationship with their grandson. Sad that Ethan would grow up knowing his grandparents had betrayed him. But I also felt relief. Justice had been served. The truth had come out, and we could finally move forward. The house sold 4 months later. It had to. Robert and Melanie couldn't make the payments from prison, and they needed to satisfy the restitution order. We received a check for $137,000. We put it in a trust fund for Ethan's future, for college or music school or whatever he decided he wanted to do with his life. We never saw Melanie or Robert again. They sent letters from prison, trying to apologize, trying to explain. David read the first one and threw the rest away unopened. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive. Some damage can't be repaired. Ethan continued with his piano lessons. Mrs. Chen said his progress had actually accelerated, like the trauma of almost losing his piano had made him appreciate it more, practice harder, feel the music more deeply. He performed in a recital 6 months after getting the piano back and played that Chopin nocturne beautifully. I sat in the audience and cried, not sad tears, proud tears. My son had his piano back. My son was safe, my family was safe, and the people who'd tried to hurt us were facing the consequences of their choices. That's not revenge, that's justice. Thank you so much for watching this story. I know it was a heavy one, but I hope it reminded you that justice is real and patience pays off. If you want to see more stories like this, more moments where the underdog wins and the truth finally comes out, I have plenty more waiting for you. Click on one of the videos on your screen right now. Trust me, you're going to want to hear what happens next in those stories too. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. This community grows stronger every day with people like you. I'll see you in the next story.